You're listening to number 128, Maura's Story, A Son with Down Syndrome. Hey friends, it's Katie from Child Life On Call. For the month of July, we are reposting some of our most downloaded episodes from the past 5 years. This is the most shared episode, most likely because Maura is a huge advocate for her son and often goes to great lengths to make sure that her son has no limits put in front of him, and he is proving that to be true. I'm so happy to bring you Maura's story. Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you guys know that if you are a parent, a child life specialist, or professional working with children, you're going to want the hospital or physician's office or urgent care that you take your kids to have the Child Life On Call app. It is an evidence-based tool designed to empower children and families during medical experiences. And 100% of the child life specialists who have used this app believe that it can help with expanding child life's reach beyond the bedside. And 100% of child life specialists believe it helps parents feel more empowered in their child's care. Learn how to get the Child Life On Call app for your facility or doctor's office by going to childlifeoncall.com/partners.
Yeah, so my name's Maura Senneff, and my husband Jack and I have 3 little kids. Well, I guess they're not so little anymore. JP is 10, Ryan is 8, and Catherine is 5. And we live in St. Louis, and that's where I grew up. And Ryan has Down syndrome, and really has, the first 6 years of his life, had just a lot of chronic illness issues that people kind of just lump into Down syndrome. But I felt like, okay, what if we like zoom out and treat him like any other kid? How would we treat this, each of these issues? And it was a long list. But anyway, so he's doing amazing now. He's 8 years old and going into 2nd grade. And he's in a gen ed private school, pretty near grade level in every subject. Wow. He's riding a bike without training wheels. He learned that at age 6. He's skiing in the trees in Colorado, Beaver Creek this past winter. He went in the trees, and he was skiing at 3. Potty trained at 3, walking at a year and a half. And that's not like, ooh, look at Ryan, because there are so many kids with Down syndrome that are doing way more than that. And so it's not a competition, but it's kind of more about where he came from and that rough first 6 years of life. Just, we can go into all that, but so it's kind of like a turnaround story and just a message of hope, because really anything can be improved or worked on. And so I think that's kind of how we got him where he is, just never giving up and kept searching.
He's like, hey, any kind of obstacle is not an obstacle to me. I'm going to plow it down and make it work.
Yeah. I mean, so for us, when you receive a diagnosis of any kind, it puts you in a box with limits. I'm sure you hear that all the time. And my husband and I decided like day one that I think we just visualized that Ryan was not going to let the Down syndrome diagnosis define him. And I'm sure many families say that and feel that and embody that. And for us, we just didn't want it to define him. And I just don't even remember if I said it out loud, but I was like, he's going to defy it. And so it wasn't just about Ryan and me being delusional or stubborn or in denial, because you sure go through a lot of grief and mourning of what you thought you had upon one of those diagnoses. But for me, it was about kind of unlocking his potential so that we could help the next generation.
Wow. Well, you're certainly doing that. And so is Ryan. I love how
Wow.
vocal you guys are and, the videos that you share and all that you've done. But, will you take us back to kind of the beginning? Because, you and I have talked before, through email that this was a diagnosis that you weren't expecting when he was born. Can you kind of walk us through like your pregnancy and the birth and all of that, the NICU stay at the beginning?
Sure. And I'm realizing I forgot to bring Kleenex over here.
Same.
And
We're in trouble.
yeah. So we did not have any prenatal testing. He was born in 2012, so that 10-week test wasn't prominent then, or I can't remember if it was out then, but anyway, it wasn't a thing. And I did watch my brother and sister-in-law go through a false positive with their first pregnancy, and my husband and I decided then, and that was before we had our first child, that we would not get any prenatal testing so I guess there must have been some kind of test because she did something. I don't remember which exact test.
Right.
But anyway, I think we watched them have a pretty grave pregnancy, and it was a false positive. And even though they had learned that their son did not have Down syndrome, like still on the day of his birth, my brother would like looked at the doctor and was like, "So are we good?" And so we just decided like all that's going to cause is anxiety, and what's the point, and whatever. So we never did any prenatal testing with our first two pregnancies. And our oldest was a healthy baby boy and, latched right on. So I kind of knew what to expect on the second birth, like, who's gonna, what happens when they hand you the baby. And so I didn't have any markers on any ultrasounds. I did have like a late ultrasound, like I can't even remember why. It was like 35 weeks or something. I don't know if I had I don't remember, honestly. I swear I blocked it out. But I remember the tech leaving the room for a while and coming back, and I had like some gut feeling of like, what's the problem? What's the problem? And no one ever said anything. And, I've never gone back, like, because it wasn't ordered for any prenatal markers. I have no idea if she saw anything or if she just left the room to see if whatever. How you just get this like,
oh, totally.
Second guess. So on the day he was born, he was a couple weeks early, Ryan. My husband travels a lot. He's in finance. And I remember we didn't even have the car seat in the car. The second kid, you just kind of were like, and I did have Braxton Hicks all day. I was at some alumni luncheon at my high school, and I kept asking my best friend, like, gosh, did you have Braxton Hicks? And everyone kept like, oh yeah, I had Braxton Hicks. So I didn't realize how high my pain tolerance was. We get to the hospital, I'm like 7 centimeters and I could barely breathe through the contractions to get the answers out about, what's your date of birth and insurance and all this. And I'm like, can't you ask my husband? Like, I'm in a bad way here. If
I
you
know.
just get the epidural, I'll be super nice. And so they finally, get through it. And I was like, oh, thank God. Now I'm just going to take a nap because I was so exhausted. And my doctor finally walked in and was like, yeah, you sneeze and this baby's coming out. So
get prepared.
Really quickly he came, and they brought him over to check him out and all that stuff. And there was a little bit more time over there than normal. And I remember I was out of it, but they called a pediatrician in, and I don't think I realized that they had called a pediatrician at the time, but looking back, someone told me or something. And so then they handed him to me, and now's when I'm wishing I had the Kleenex, and he wouldn't latch on and had like no suck reflex. And so immediately I knew like something was off because he had just like he wasn't really crying and like no fire, that these newborns have. So and you can't help but compare that to your first newborn. Like that's all you know for reference. And so for some reason, like everyone left the room. So I'm looking back, I think it was like to give us a moment to bond and before all the shock and whirlwind and all that stuff happened. So we were there for a while and I kept trying to get him to nurse and it was ticking me off that he wouldn't latch on and he didn't really have like I said, like, why doesn't he have a desire to eat? He's not hungry. Like, this is not okay. But he didn't look, sickly. They had mentioned something about his breathing, but it obviously wasn't that acute because they let me hold him for a while.
Yeah.
And I looked at my husband, Jack, and said, he looks like he has Down syndrome. And he was like, and I think the reason I can't believe I'm like on a podcast crying, but I think the reason I'm crying is that it's not that I'm sad now, it's that I can't believe how sad I was. And I didn't know anything. And I didn't, like, parents don't know what they don't know. And, now I think of that day and I'm like, that wasn't a great day in terms of the shock. But I'm sad about all the emotions that we went through and parents have to go through to get to the other side, to realize the endless joy and powerful lessons and just victories and, now how much joy Ryan brings us. It makes me like kind of crazy to think about all that sadness that goes into the initial shock. And I wouldn't want to like relive those early days of trying to, your head's spinning and you're trying to figure out what the right formula is and all this stuff. So,
yeah.
Well,
anyway, you're definitely you're not alone. I've had so many parents on this podcast say, I wish I could go back and tell myself, guess where we end up? Like, guess where we get to? And, it's also, I hear that you really don't have the experience of these intense joys until you have felt some of that pain and that sorrow and the unknown. It's just, it gives me chill bumps just thinking about the different level of emotion that you go through.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so our pediatrician, they did take Ryan to the NICU and, they just kind of said, oh, we're just going to check some things. And I think I didn't even go in there because I think I knew I had to like get my own head in order.
Yeah.
Which
that makes
sounds
sense.
horrible, but I don't think they wanted me in there at first. They were running tests and all this stuff, and they wanted our pediatrician to deliver the news, and they had to wait on this blood test. And anyway, so my husband had been out in the hall, our friends and my mom came to visit, and they all went in there, and my husband was out in the hall and he saw our pediatrician. It was a Saturday night and he walked in his like work clothes from being out in the yard, and he knew immediately, like, that's not normal. The pediatrician doesn't just roll in on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And so he sat down on my bed, and my husband, Jack, was in the chair next to me, and the doctor held my hand and said, I don't know why I'm crying. He said, I'm pretty sure Ryan has Down syndrome. And I just blocked out everything else he was saying. Like, I don't really remember. I remember he started talking about the heart and looking for a hole in the heart and all this stuff, but I literally blocked it out. And I looked at Jack, and I knew when I saw Jack's head in his hands that I would have to lead this mission. Not that he couldn't handle it, but he works 90 hours a week and travels, and my rock that I always lean on was I just knew in that instant, like, he's just as clueless on this one as I am.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have the bandwidth to do all the research, and
Yeah.
he certainly has been supportive, and in the early days went to, tons of doctor appointments, if they were talking about surgery or something, but I just kind of knew, like, oh boy, this one's on me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the heart was fine. Like I said, a lot of kids overcome much bigger health obstacles than mine. Like 50% are born with a hole in their heart. And, just, you never know how the extra chromosome is going to affect the systems in the body. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not a one size fits all thing. It's like, just can be any number of health issues. So there are certainly a list of, like, some that are more common and all that stuff. So in general, he was pretty healthy, and was on a breathing, tube. I don't remember if he was on a tube. He was on a vent. I don't know what he was on. Maybe just nasal. I blocked it out.
Do you know what though? Like it's good to hear you say that, because when you're in it, it's like you're living minute to minute. It's like,
Yeah.
the amount of milliliters they just had and how much they puked. So it's like, it's a little bit of a relief to hear you say you don't remember,
Yeah.
because when you're in it, it is all encompassing.
Yes.
So, like there becomes a point where it just becomes, oh, it was a breathing tube and it was still serious. And I remember the details of it, but it takes a little bit of pressure off. Like this
Yes.
day to day is going to go away at some point.
Yes. Yes. And the thing that the pediatrician said to us that I'll never forget, and I say this to new families of any, and it really, adults, kids, any diagnosis, is you have to mourn the loss of what you thought you had. And that is a critical piece, like you said. And a lot of doctors were like, well, do you want a Xanax or an Ambien or this or that? And I was like, I don't judge people who take that by any means. People need that. But for me, I just felt like I didn't have experience with taking those kind of things, and I didn't feel like it was a good time to try. And
Yeah,
I felt like I needed to feel the feels, like feel
sure.
all the emotions to get to the other side. And for me, I didn't want to be numb, not just because I knew there would be a million decisions to make, but also because I just felt like I needed to feel every emotion at that moment, even though it was not an enjoyable time to
Right.
feel those. And that stress, and a lot of it was just the overwhelming unknown, like you said.
Right.
But I think to get to the other side and be stronger for myself personally, um, we had to get over that. And I think I spent, like, the beginning few months just with people saying dumb things to me. And so I was,
Oh,
like,
yes.
spun up and ticked off all the time with those kind of things. But it was nothing I wouldn't have said to someone else, because I did not know what Down syndrome was. Neither did my husband.
Yeah,
I mean, we had, like, an idea, but
sure.
we really weren't exposed to many people with special needs because we both went to private school our whole lives. And but what I did know, and, like, a nurse came in and told me about her sister, and, people shared stories. What I did know was immediately we had to improve the trajectory and the outcomes and the story and what's possible for the next generation. And that's true probably of any diagnosis, I would guess. Parents feel that way. I didn't have a background in education or, you know, um, anything having to do with physical therapy or anything like that.
Yeah.
I worked
Yeah.
in medical device sales and pharmaceutical sales, so I knew a little bit about Western medicine, but I was not an expert in any way on any kind of teaching or anything. But I knew logically that anything could be worked on or improved,
Yeah.
and whether it was health outcomes or um, cognitive outcomes. So I did, our older son, we read to him a lot and read to Ryan a lot. And I just kind of, like, day one was like, we're going to get this kid going. So
Yeah.
we did do that, and it worked well in some ways. with he was actually reading before he learned to talk, and we didn't realize it until he learned to talk.
Wow.
Um, he So I didn't know if he would talk. Some kids with Down syndrome or autism or others, don't talk. And
Right.
so I didn't know if he was going to talk. We obviously had all the intervention therapists. And my idea was, all right, we're just going to like triple the amount of therapy and that'll work. We'll
Yeah.
get him going that way, like on this one path. And it worked in some ways. Like he met milestones not as late as he would have had we not done that. But
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't, it was like his health, we couldn't keep the balls all moving forward because his health was constantly getting in the way. So he had chronic constipation. So he only pooped like every couple weeks. And so that was like a thorn in my side for sure.
Mm.
And no one really wanted to say it, but they were, finally I flew him around the country and people were kind of like, probably going to be on a diaper or a daily suppository for the rest of his life. And
Wow. That's a lot to hear.
so people, they waited to say it. It took me like really asking some questions. I'm like, what's the deal? Why haven't we fixed this? But more acute issues were just constant infections, like ear infections, respiratory infections in the hospital a couple times with RSV and pneumonia. And as late as 2017, he was, I think, 5, was in the ICU with mycoplasma pneumonia.
Wow.
And that's when I vowed, like, all right, we are never coming back here.
Yeah.
And, so had to, turn over a lot of rocks along the way to, just get out of that constant feeling of like we were drowning in acute illness.
Yeah.
And so
When you guys were hospitalized for whether it was an infection or whatever, how did you communicate to the medical team what worked? Because it's like you're always an advocate as a mother, right? But then when you go into a situation and you're depending on people to take care of him who don't know him like you do, how did you translate that to the medical team?
So, I didn't know a lot about ICU medicine. I'd been in the ICU with some, medical devices. I'd been in there. But it's not like I could treat my son.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I knew also enough about research. Down syndrome actually had no research for 20 years in Congress, until like 2 years ago. No NIH research because the answer in Congress was early prenatal testing for abortion. And
Wow.
I actually wouldn't let myself go there mentally, but I
Right.
knew, again, if we just zoom out and look at him like a little boy instead of like this boy with Down syndrome who has all these
Right.
health issues that, we can't fix. One of the earliest things we learned when he was like 2 weeks old, they do a CBC blood draw on every kid with Down syndrome at least once a year because they often have a low white blood count and just counts all over the place. And leukemia is more common with kids with Down syndrome. So I think they just monitor that. And Ryan had a very low white blood count at birth, which is what fights infection. And Ryan had a lot of blood draws emergently, with different petechia rashes and things that can appear with either as a present in leukemia or a staph infection and I'll never forget when they first told me he had a low white blood count, I was like, so what do we do to fix that?
Yeah.
And they were like, so sometimes they just walk around like that. And I was like, are they like a different species and it wasn't that, I guess it just, had this no limits mentality from day
Yeah.
one that um, people weren't used to, I think,
Mm-hmm.
both in the medical community and the, um, education world. And I had called, tons of people I knew with kids with Down syndrome, and, they might have had other challenges, but they didn't have this low white blood count and chronic constipation. And we ended up getting, because of all these infections and GI issues, we ended up down this track of like a lot of functional medicine doctors. And so it seemed like, okay, we have all these lists of labs with horrific, um, every lab is in a horrible range, scary
Yeah.
bad, almost like, why did I even do that? But then at
Right.
least I felt like, okay, well, we can fix that. How do we fix that? You know,
Right.
gives you like a
Yeah.
to-do list. But,
Right.
then we tried all these things and nothing worked. And, you try, and nothing, like, I wasn't just Googling stuff. We had like MDs. I was flying in. I had
Sure.
him potty trained at age 3 behaviorally by an ABA behavioral therapist in New York City. And she really was a pivotal force. Um, she was a BCBA, and that is like a therapist for people think it's only for autism, right? But
Right.
again, when I zoomed out and I was like, well, the brain is a brain. How
Right.
about we just apply that therapy to Ryan, and anyone can learn anything, right? I mean, think about it. We use that therapy essentially for animals, like whether it's sea lions at the zoo or
It's true.
dogs or horses. It's behavioral therapy. It's like a reward based system or therapy. And my husband and I had tried to get him potty trained on our own using the same method as our older son, 3-day potty training. And we made enough progress to know he could do it on our own, but we weren't using the right currency. We kept trying to give him Matchbox cars and stuff. But like, he's looking at us like, I already have 1,000 Matchbox cars because he gave those to JP when he was potty trained.
Oh my
So
gosh.
he was
Yeah.
like, So
Math.
when we flew to New York, this woman had him on the morning of day 2, leaving a preferred activity, coloring, so like not math problems,
Right.
walking in on his own to go independently indicating he had to go to the bathroom.
Wow.
And he was verbal, but not that verbal. Maybe he could say potty, but I don't even know if he was doing that at the time. Um,
Yeah.
and But what that showed me was, or reinforced to me, was like, I'm not crazy. He can learn anything. We had
Yeah.
done the infant's rescue swimming at 14 months, and same thing. I made him walk all the way in the pool from the parking lot with his little Nimbo walker, and he could swim and roll over and float in the water before he could walk without that walker. And so
Wow.
it was just like finding those people out there who were willing to get in the trenches with you, essentially, and
Right.
give him a shot.
Yeah.
And the early intervention therapists that came to our house like 3 to 4 days a week each, his PT, OT, and speech therapists, I mean, they are like part of the family. They were certainly in the trenches with us, and it works well for a lot of kids. But Ryan and a lot of kids with Down syndrome need more. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was like a matter of constantly trying to triage the acute illness and then keep the
Yeah.
like skills moving forward. And there was definitely a lot of regression. And so it was just kind of this whirlwind the first 6 years until we've kind of found the right fit for him.
Yeah. I have so many questions in my mind. One of them is about, you mentioned when people say the wrong thing to you, and I'm sure it comes with practice and patience and self-reflection like anything else. But for a parent who is just starting out with a baby with Down syndrome or another chronic illness of some kind, and people say the wrong things, how did you process that stuff? How did you respond? Like, how did you deal with that?
Um, So I've had people reach out to me, like just randomly from other states on my Instagram, who are like, wow, your page shows so much hope. And it's not that Ryan is doing more than other people. He's not. Like, we have friends who have overcome incredible odds, like a little guy who was like 12 or 13 or 11 or 12 who is nonverbal, and he's no longer nonverbal. He's talking now. And another little guy who is in Kansas City who's Ryan's age, and he's like skiing way better than Ryan. His mom's a PT, and I'm like, you don't realize how lucky you are, you're a PT. But he's killing it. And so for Ryan, even me in the NICU, I remember calling them Downs kids, and I would be like, well, do Downs kids do this? Do Downs kids do that to the neonatologist? Can they do this? And I remember hearing her say, yeah, kids with Down syndrome. And like, now it does kind of like irk me a little bit when people call him like a Downs kid, and it's not that they mean to, like, I did it. I didn't know. It's more just about, it's not a PC thing. It's like just kind of like a way that, I always say Ryan has Down syndrome, and somebody from the Down Syndrome Association of St. Louis actually told me this and gave me a little pamphlet on like the language to use and stuff. Yeah. And it's, again, it's not like a PC thing, I don't think. I think it's just more about, again, not letting that define who he is.
Sure, he's a child first.
Yeah,
foremost.
He's Ryan, and he happens to have Down syndrome.
Right, exactly.
And I think that having that mentality has helped us continue to ensure that he does not let that define him.
We'll be right back. If you have ever wondered where you could get those cloth dolls that child life specialists use with kids for medical education or sending home to siblings or to draw on for therapeutic activities, then you don't have to wonder any longer, because our friends at Smile Makers have decided to now sell these amazing cloth dolls for a very affordable price. I know that when I was in the hospital, I would have to rely on a volunteer network to then give us the dolls, which was really nice, but I had to wait a lot of times. Like, I would need a doll now and I wasn't able to get it. So this is a great place to be able to go get your procedure dolls at smilemakers.com. And y'all, they have 3 different skin tones for these cloth procedure dolls. In addition, you can actually buy a procedure doll prep bundle that comes with fabric markers. This is a fabulous way to do your medical teaching, to help siblings feel involved, to get kids creative, to do a lot of teaching about different diagnoses. And so go to smilemakers.com so you can get your cloth dolls as soon as possible before they run out. And when you go to that checkout to get your cloth dolls, also type in OnCall20 and you will get 20% off your entire order. So not just the cloth dolls. So if you get a bundle for Child Life Specialists, if you get a piece of furniture, if you get one of their really cool toys and prizes, or you order a large sticker order from them, OnCall20 gets you 20% off your whole order. That's smilemakers.com, code OnCall20 to get 20% off.
I think it's easy to get into this self-fulfilling prophecy as a parent or as a society or educators or physicians or whatever, as putting kids in a box, or anyone in a box, with limits with that diagnosis. Yeah. And like, that's really all the story we heard, that was limits. And right. That's what I was not willing to, I couldn't get on that train. And so I tell new families, it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to turn over a lot of rocks, but I can help you, show you what worked for us. But there are a lot of things out there that'll work, but the biggest thing is you wake up every day and you tell yourself there are no limits, and you tell your little one no limits, and just those high expectations. Like, behaviorally, he has the same expectations as our other kids. And really, he actually has higher expectations because people have low expectations of him, and he knows that. So, when he was really little, he like wore a collared shirt 100% of the time because people at the grocery store would treat him better if he was like prepped out in preppy clothes. And anywhere. And so, whereas my other son wore like, Superman t-shirts and whatever when he was, he wore preppy clothes too, but even to preschool, I don't think he ever wore a t-shirt. And now my 10-year-old JP is like, Mom, he needs to look like a normal dude. He needs to wear like an Under Armour shirt or whatever, so now he's like, especially in COVID, quarantine, our other son's not going to school in his collared shirt. So
yeah, exactly.
They're both, but he wants to wear whatever JP wears to bed. And that happens to be shorts and a t-shirt now. So that's what he's wearing. But his behavior has to be pretty dang near perfect. And even his head of school called me in right before COVID, January, February, and said, Maura, he's in a typical gen ed school and he has some private therapists that go in. And she said, I just don't think he needs all these therapists. Like, he's just doing amazing. Like, why do you have all these? And I was like, I get it. And so it's like a train the trainer kind of model where they'll kind of train all of his teachers. And this year there were more specials teachers, like the science teacher and stuff, on his behavior plan, which is very simple. It's just, he has to do things himself and he has to ask for help. And, so there are all these like language challenges he had to where he couldn't ask for help. So that's where like 90-something% of behaviors pop in for kids, any kid, but particularly a kid with special needs who has a language delay, is if they don't know how to ask their peers to play or ask their peers, hey, can I have that ball back? Or where's the bathroom? Or can you help me with this worksheet? Or they don't have the executive functioning skills. So anyway, to answer your question about what do we say in the early days, you just have to not let it get to you. And I wasn't always good about that, but I think if I had to do anything all over again, it would be to, I wish I would have meditated day one. And someone brought me a little reading when he was in the hospital about living in day tight compartments. And it just said, you can't control, we kept thinking about where's he going to live when he's 45 and is he going to live with us? And all these thoughts that come in your mind about like, is he going to be verbal? Is he this? Is he that? Is he going to, I don't know. Like all the dark thoughts come in your mind and thoughts about like, well, I don't know. So meditation, I am not a crunchy person, but people told me to do this for years. He has like a few doctors who are not from the US and then a couple PhDs from other countries and an MD who's from India. And then one of his therapists, PhD therapists, lived all over the world. And I thought it is ironic that they are all avid meditators and they have all been telling me to start meditating. And I never did it. And then like 2019, I was like, Jack, we're going to meditate every day. And then I still didn't do it. I did it like 9 times. And then one day halfway through the year, I was like, no, for real, we're going to meditate. And he's like, Maura, I have been. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I just play the Peloton app when I'm traveling and I can't sleep. So it just helps you not get wrapped in all those overwhelming thoughts and you still have those thoughts and you need to have those thoughts, but it just kind of helps you like watch them pass by instead of getting stressed out. And then once I started meditating, I realized, oh, wow, my heart was like racing a lot. So that's not actually normal. And it just helps you sleep better. You can just turn on the app and you're in a coma instantly. And that is critical for any parent on the planet, but especially one who's dealing with, a chronic illness and or like a billion things trying to figure out,
I like that,
all these developmental mind stuff.
it's like the meditation it's great because you can take it with you anywhere. It's really inexpensive, and it's a tool that can work regardless of the situation you're in. So like if you're in a grocery store and you're stressed, it's not that you can sit there and on the floor and meditate, but you can reach back to your meditative state and where you were and calm yourself to get close to there. Do you know what I mean? So it's like,
just take a deep breath.
Yeah. And, people can say that to us until they're blue in the face, but I love that you're mentioning meditation because it is incredibly powerful for kids too.
Our kids, it's funny you say that, have started doing it with us. Mm-hmm. And again, we do not sit in the middle of the floor. We don't have a meditation room. We're not like on pillows at noon with, sitting cross-legged. It's like 10 minutes in the morning before you get out of bed on your little app, and 10 minutes at night. And, a lot of times I don't do it in the morning, but I should. But when your 3 kids are all talking to you at the same time, and in the back of your mind is not only the list of the, doctors you need to call after you make all these lunches and this and that.
Yeah.
It's hard. I was snapping at my kids a lot, and it has really helped with that and being more patient. And my kids now ask to do it before bed, especially the younger 2. And Catherine, our youngest, went through a crying phase, and, I think they all do, but she was like 5 when she was going through this, and it wasn't at school. It was just at home, like these tantrums. And we started doing it with her, and it helped a ton. Just not like, hey, tantrum equals meditation. We would just do it proactively before bed, and it just helped her stay in bed and stay calm. And just, I kind of tell them it's a life skill. It's like a tool in their toolbox that none of us got when we were growing up in the 80s, or at least I was.
Yeah, exactly.
And so this is another tool. And my oldest actually, he doesn't do it as often, but I did turn on the Calm app, and he thought it was cool that LeBron James, the basketball player, had a whole series. And it was about,
that's cool.
Like people think that my jump shot or my workout or my nutrition or this or that is like the key to my success. He's like, honestly, it's about calming the mind. And he talks through about different games and, some tied game with a minute left, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, they called a timeout, and you'll see me on the TV, like sitting there with my head, just getting in the zone. And so
an adolescent can for sure relate to that, right? If you see one of your idols doing it in that kind of a situation.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just think it has helped me manage stress, and also honestly, like think more clearly and problem solve much better than when I always say at the beginning, my head was spinning. And so that's the other thing I tell new families and new parents, because, they're like so sad, and they're like, is this normal? And I can't think. And one mom's like, I've been having these panic attacks, and I'm like, that is normal. It is normal. And it is, I can't say I had a panic attack, but I can tell you that stress and that feeling of your head spinning, I have been there, and it is not fun, and you do not need to stay there. The number one thing is to start meditating, because you have to be able to breathe and think about triaging 19 things at once.
Right. That's a good way to put it, for sure.
So I don't know. And then also I don't know, I read some book about it, and it was saying how moms of kids with chronic illness show stress on their brain. So I think that was honestly what made me really kind of like, okay, we're going to do this.
Right. Exactly.
I don't know what my MRI looks like right now.
Yeah. It's true.
So anyway.
So, you mentioned so you like the Calm app. And then you mentioned there was and Headspace. And then you mentioned the St. Louis, is it the Down Syndrome Association, and what other resources, really have helped you guys throughout his 8 years?
So he's found, St. Louis Children's Hospital has been huge. A lot of his specialists are like family there, especially when we were like living there triaging all these acute illnesses all the time. we've also found some, so when we did that potty training weekend in New York, I realized that ABA behavioral therapy is the key to life. And so anyone listening to this who has any child with genetic abnormality or even just like a health diagnosis that requires them to relearn some skills or keep their skills up can use behavioral therapy in terms of retraining the brain. And so I think that's the biggest message that I also tell new families is the brain is not fixed. And so it is malleable and it molds with experience. So the more you put in and use it like a muscle, the better the long-term outcomes with any human on the planet. So people think this ABA is only for kids with autism, but again, it can be used for like any human. I could use it. I'm always late. I could use a little plan. But for kids with a severe language delay, of course, speech therapy is part of the early model that works, right? Early intervention model. But I think that applying that applied verbal analysis subspecialty of ABA is critical, intense language acquisition that will close the gap on a lot of those language delays that A, cause behavioral issues, or B, just the kids can't communicate their needs, so people don't think that they understand or, and if you think about it like an IQ test, what is that? Any immigrant, you would have like a neuroscientist or something, but if English is not their first language and they're not great at English, but they're brilliant, they're going to bomb an IQ test.
Yeah.
So with Ryan, like, who cares about like an IQ test? But my point is, it's all about like, how do we get him to communicate what's inside?
Right.
And also communicate, like for example, on a reading comprehension test, sometimes he could answer the correct multiple choice question, but he couldn't verbalize the right answer, right? So our goal is not to have him have accommodations his whole life with multiple choice questions. It's to close the gap on that language deficiency. So for us, the applied verbal analysis subspecialty of ABA has been critical. And I think also, if there was another thing I was to start at the beginning that we didn't start till he was like 5 or 6 is starting with that ABA therapy at birth for any kid with a disability is critical because it trains them on all those executive functioning skills that are often the reason they don't always, people don't see their potential as they get put in preschool and then passed on to early or elementary school. So if at birth they're meeting their miles quickly or quicker because an ABA therapist is helping the PT and OT measure every rep, not just every day the data, but every rep. And then if they're plateauing, they go back and like modify the task to break down the skill to make it easier to master that skill to then get to the next step, if that makes sense, of whatever the skill is that they're learning. Then by preschool, when they're learning how to put their lunchbox in their backpack and hang it up on the hook, these like couple of step directions, they can do it along their peers. Right. But I think what happens is with just PTOT and speech, they are working on those. Of course, he had therapists working on all those multi-step directions his whole 6 years until we started ABA, but he needed more. I think they would all agree that it was like he was progressing, but once we added in that step, it's what was critical. So if I had to do it all over again, that is the fastest piece to add to the team of all the therapists. And then I just randomly broke my foot. I don't know if that was the next question you were going to ask.
Yeah. How are your feet?
My feet are fine. But this was a couple of years ago. I randomly broke my foot really badly. And I told my doctor I was above nothing and I would do anything to heal this thing, because I had 3 little kids that needed me like in the pool.
Yeah.
You know, they could swim independently, but I couldn't like sit on the lawn chair. And so I found myself my medical doctor sent me to a PhD Chinese medicine doctor from China. And that has been for us the other pivotal piece of the puzzle to really turn around Ryan's health, to go from triaging one acute illness after the other, labs that were all horrific. We learned Ryan had 2 small kidneys and one was 2 standard deviations smaller than the other, and ultimately learned after a couple eye surgeries, first strabismus, which is muscle correction, we learned that he was not even using his right eye. So and then remember he had like all these respiratory infections, like one after the other. So when I was in there getting this acupuncture, I had immediate pain relief and my swelling went down. And this is like, I'm not saying you go to any random with needles. I'm saying 5 generations of her family are doing this.
Wow.
But I felt immediate pain relief and the swelling went down. And I used to sell, drugs that provided pain relief or swelling. And I knew that was unreal, like those results. So it was just in there one day and learned that, I started asking her venting to her really about Ryan. And I said, my son just got all these labs back. He has Down syndrome and all of his vitamins are horrific. Like his medical doctor has him on all these like vitamin B shots and different things. It's just not getting into his cells. And she's frustrated. I'm frustrated. I've flown him all over the country. At one point he was on a daily suppository for over a year. Then at this point he was on like all this colon blow, and I just was like venting. Never dreamed I would bring my little 6-year-old in there. Yeah. And she just kept popping needles in my leg. And she said, oh yeah, he's not absorbing vitamins in his food. You can't just raise the dose. He won't absorb it. And I kind of was like, well, do you have a way to do that? Or, I looked at her like she had 10 heads. Yeah. And she said, yeah, bring him in and we'll start with his stomach and go from there. And so my goal was like, maybe she can help with this constipation, because that's a big thorn in our side. I didn't have any hope or thought that she would solve any of those other issues I just mentioned. And I asked my medical doctor, who also sees Ryan, and I said, like MD, I said, I think I'm going to bring him to this doctor. What do you think? And she's the one who referred me to her. So she said, give it a shot, because what we're doing is not working. Yeah. And again, she's from India and she's trained here in the US, but being able to zoom out and have global perspective that this is a big planet and there are a lot of different ways of doing things, and we don't have all the answers. And I think that's the other message for new families is really to just never stop with that no limits mentality, because once you realize that no one person has all the answers, it gives you this boundless hope of like, there's something out there and something is going to work.
It's like widening your lens, right? It's like, it's really easy to just get focused on these little tiny care plans, but open up your mind to other ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. And what works for like another patient population, like this therapy for kids with autism, like there's no reason we can't use it. And I'm not the first mom to use this therapy on my child with Down syndrome. but Ryan had a pretty rigid flop and drop at transitions and didn't have language to say, I don't feel well. So he was like asleep on the floor in the library, and people were like, oh, I think it's just Down syndrome. And I'm like, no, he just like, we need to behaviorally train him to A, power through things when they're hard or he's tired, and B, say, I don't feel well. So I just felt like I needed some ninjas to help.
Yeah. Sounds like you got a few on your team.
Just keep looking for those people who are willing to look beyond a diagnosis and get in the trenches with you. So long story short, with this Chinese medicine doctor, and again, I used to roll my eyes at this stuff in my background. I definitely was not open-minded to this kind of stuff. But at this point, I figured I had nothing to lose. Mm-hmm. And his doctor agreed. So I brought him in, and within a week or two, he started pooping every day on his own.
Wow.
So that alone was a huge quality of life improvement for everyone in our family, right?
Right.
I mean, I couldn't express to you how huge that was. That I was, a lot of families are told it's 2020, and a lot of families are told, like, your kid's going to be in a diaper for the rest of his life, or don't even bother potty training him at age 3, or so he was behaviorally potty trained, but again, the GI issues and stuff were kind of impeding the, it was a mess. So then all these other things started improving like a ripple effect. So we have all these therapists, these specialists that follow him, right? And his therapist had behaviorally trained him to hold the book at the proper distance, and she was monitoring his eyes, and she was like, you need to get his eyes checked again. And I was like, we just went to the eye surgeon. Mm-hmm. So I went in there in my crutches and my boot with 3 kids, and he's, they did all the measurements and everything, and he stopped and looked at me and he goes, this is a world-renowned eye surgeon. He said, what are you doing for Ryan's constipation? I said, oh, you're not going to believe this. Crutches, boot, broken foot, Chinese medicine, PhD. And he said, Ryan's farsightedness just improved by 1/3.
Wow.
And that was June of 2018, and I think he had been in the eye doctor in March or April. I can't remember. I have to look at the chart. And so I said, so do you think I'm crazy? And he said, no, keep doing that. Like, whatever you're doing. So then the next checkup, again, they were like, what are you doing? His vision had gone from 20/70 to 20/30.
Oh my gosh.
So, and then mind you, he had these kidneys that were way too small. His liver function was horrific. All his labs were horrific. So we had gotten these lab draws. We did them routinely for his thyroid. He had low hypothyroidism. And also we were always monitoring the blood counts with the CBC and stuff. So in 5 weeks after we started going to her, his labs were all in normal range.
I mean, it just shows you, like, literally everything is connected. You know, treatment for GI can affect this, I mean,
yeah. So he finally started absorbing vitamins in his food. And so when we got that first set of labs back, his MD, who's incredible, by the way, this is another huge resource, and people do fly all over the country to see her. It's Palm Health in St. Louis, and they're functional medicine doctors. And she said, with tears in her eyes, she looked at me and said, Maura, I don't think you understand how much stuff he was on just to stay out of the ICU.
Wow.
And so his labs went from scary, horrific, every single one, barely hanging on, we're just trying to keep him out of the hospital, to, I'm not just talking sick, I'm talking like rash sick, like, is this, we're going to the ICU. And she was like, this is incredible. So his vitamin B, he had been on like B shots, this, that, nothing was getting into his cells. And all of a sudden on this lab, it was through the roof, meaning he didn't need those supplements anymore. So we just, slowly and safely took him off. So then he's all of a sudden on nothing.
Yeah.
He is pooping every day on his own, which that alone was like a huge life improvement. So his labs are all of a sudden in normal range. And then his thyroid dose, he was on a thyroid pill every day for like a person like 4 times his size. I mean, it was very high dose, and it came down. It has come down a few times, which never happens. Also, vision in kids with Down syndrome, when that eye doctor started telling me about his eyes improving, I mean, I expected him to say they were worse. I mean, kids get cataract surgeries at like age 8 with Down syndrome. I mean, vision really never improves. I don't want to say never, but it's not common. And so all these things started improving, and then his kidneys are now the same size and growing normally for his size and age and weight.
Wow.
So that was like mind blowing to the urologist and all of his doctors, really.
It just makes me wish that we had that kind of medicine in every single children's hospital. If they could just work together.
I know.
It doesn't have to be so different.
I know. And apparently, so that's like the other thing I'm always saying to her. I'm like, wait, hold on. Why are you not on CNN? Are they researching this? Like, what do they do? Why don't people know about this? Like what's happening? And she was like, well, who pays for all the research?
I know.
And
it's
then,
true.
Again, when you zoom out and realize people are doing things differently, and believe me, I lived in France for a year in college and worked at the European Parliament studied political science, and I was the arrogant study abroad kid who was like rolling my eyes at a lot of the things they were doing. Why don't they have chemicals in their food, and why don't they sell deodorant? And turns out they were a little bit ahead of us.
Yeah, it's true.
Now, and then we later learned he was not using his right eye. It had 0 depth perception. And so again, you're in PE class or in general in the world, people think like these behaviors or these inability to, really, like motor control or hand-eye coordination, all this stuff is just Down syndrome, quote. But really it's like, well, what if we get the brain and the body to connect and things are all moving in the right direction? So now he has binocular vision, his depth perception is at age level. And so literally every category, and then he has not been sick in 2 years. He did not get influenza A the last 2 winters when it went around his class, and he did not get the stomach flu the last 2 winters when it went around the class. And my husband travels, like I said, a ton, and he's been between January and March of this year, he was in probably 15 cities with COVID all over the world. And so he did not, he did get some coughs and stuff like that, but he didn't, he's healthy. I mean, he's very healthy. Now, we're in a pandemic and we can't jinx it, so we're staying home and not going anywhere.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is not, but I'd rather do that than be in the ICU.
What has Ryan taught you about life and happiness that you didn't know before he came into your life?
Why is it throwing the tearjerker?
I know.
So Ryan really, truly, like I said, he's achieved. It's not that he's achieved much, because it's more about he has overcome so much, and he proves every day that not just hard work, because I think the first 3 years or 5 years, I thought it was just hard work that was going to turn things around or help him, but really hard work and just being open to new things has really proven that the no limits mentality can be applied to anything, whether it's a typical kid who's dealing with a reading issue or a behavioral issue, or, you know, trust me, my other two kids everybody's got things going on, right? Or if it's a health issue, like Ryan has taught us really, that if you just keep playing an active role in finding the right resources, they're out there. And, you know, it's isolating, certainly, to feel like you're reinventing the wheel. And like you're pushing, you know, sometimes you're in these meetings feeling like you're negotiating with North Korea, feeling, you know, talking about like, no, he can do more, you know, right. But if you just think outside the box, Ryan proves every day that anything is possible. And I mean, my husband and I, you know, of course we're proud of our other two typical kids, but like they have most things come easy to them, whether it's sports or reading or this and that, like any skill or behavior or health issue can be worked on and improved. But when we see Ryan achieve something, we know, particularly in the first 6 years when his health was so rough and it was a huge barrier to his success. I mean, there were a lot of tears when he would just like sit up by himself or, stand up by himself or start walking or talking and now like this whole thing that went viral on the internet with him skipping, that was really, again, a back to the drawing board moment of, me going to Dr. Zhang and saying, okay, he's been working on skipping and these preschool skills. Like we kind of just forgot about him for a while because he just wasn't getting them and was plateauing. Yeah. But he's got to get them because it'll help with shoe tying and ball skills and reading and writing and all these things, the left, right brain stuff. And so she started focusing on those gross motor coordination and motor planning skills. I just knew like we could just make these leaps and bounds like much quicker. And he literally went from like plateauing and skipping and jumping jacks and all these skills. And again, who cares if you ever get them? Sure. But it's just, he pretty much immediately got them after like 5 or 6 treatments. So the one other kind of exciting thing is he did participate in a NIH study last summer, and they did an MRI on his brain, and the world-renowned pediatric neuroradiologist called me and spent like 40 minutes on the phone and wrote up a report and said, I could not tell when we're looking at Ryan's brain that he has Down syndrome. Wow. So typically you'd see like smaller gray matter, atrophy, you know, all these kind of things. And he said I can typically tell when looking at a child's MRI if they have a developmental delay and then go confirm later in the chart. And he said I could not tell when looking at Ryan's brain. Gosh. So it just goes to show that the brain is a muscle. Yeah. And if you use it, and then, you know, Dr. Zhang does put in a lot of needles in his brain, because I was like, by the way, he has the APO gene, and kids with Down syndrome are more like 100% will have signs of Alzheimer's on their brain by age 40. So again, the list is very long. Yeah. Of issues. And her research in China was on silencing the Alzheimer's gene, or maybe vascular dementia. But point is, yeah, whatever she's doing, I can't really explain it in Western medicine terms, but the neuroradiologist was like, I mean, from everything you're telling me with his kidneys and brain and everything, it's like producing blood flow to the organs. Sure. So that applies to all humans. Yeah. So
It's the connectedness of it all. My favorite part is you mentioned the little video of him skipping and your husband skipping alongside each other. And I have to say my favorite part is at the end when he looks at your husband and says, "I'm so proud of you, Dad." Because what that does is it's showing the love that you guys give to him so easily just pours through him to someone else too. You know, it's like he has just done this amazing task and this amazing thing, and his immediate reaction is to give love, right? So that just must be what he feels all of the time from you and your husband. So I think that's a pretty awesome thing.
Well, thank you. I mean, he certainly feels it from his siblings, because he wouldn't be where he is without them either. They're tough on him, and they have high expectations. And I think I have one video on my Instagram of our older son. He plays hockey, and he's teaching him to roller skate in the driveway.
Yeah.
And I just came outside, and he's yelling at him, and he's teaching him crossovers with his skates, which is like a complicated thing, like hockey thing. I cannot do it. Yeah. And then he's like put his hockey stick on the ground, and he said, "All right, Ryan, now we're going to do jump crossovers." And Ryan's wearing these like old school Fisher Price, skates from like the 80s or whatever. And he said, "We're going to do jump crossovers." And I'm like, whoa, JP, what are you doing? Did you learn jump crossovers the same day you learned crossover?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, like, how many lessons did it take you? Like years to
Yeah.
What are you doing? And he's like, "No, Mom, he's doing amazing. He can do it." And it just, that to me is like the epitome of, what I wish the whole world would do with kids with disabilities, is just give them a chance. Like, who am I to say Ryan can't learn these jump crossovers? JP's like, "Mom, he's doing it." Anything is possible. And the higher the bar you set, they will reach it. Yes, it's going to take some thinking outside the box, but once you kind of zoom out and realize there's a lot of people out there with incredible ideas, and there are no limits on what they can do.
Thank you so much to Maura for sharing your story and for sharing Ryan's journey and how the no limits mentality truly helped your family and turn Ryan's health around. Thank you for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, and you can follow us at Child Life On Call on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please rate and review to make it easier for other families to find us. We have cute merch available at www.bonfire.com/store/childlifeoncall, and you can listen to more episodes and find resources at childlifepodcast.com.